Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres, and if you've been following me for a while, you know this is the studio. Ding. I'll have to see if that's a fake message. I've been getting a few of those lately. You know, like, everything has been put on hold, everything is frozen, you need to do this, click on this thing. And I'm like, no, I'll go check through my regular sources, yeah. Anyway, that's just spam. So what I'm doing this morning is a couple of things. When I do preparation for an event, it always makes a bit of a mess. It also sometimes uses up pieces of equipment. Now, what I mean by that is like you might use up your sandpaper or something like that, and it needs to be replaced, but you're pressing to get to an event, so you worry about it when you get back. Now this morning, what I'm actually doing is getting ready to draw down some wire, and I don't believe I've ever showed that before. So I thought I'd at least run through the basic premise here and explain the whole process, or sort of the process at least. So when you want to take a piece of wire and make it go from larger to smaller, you use what they call a draw plate. Let me just pop this guy out here. And that's Henry. Okay, let's try that again. So when you want to draw down wire, that is take it from a larger size to a smaller size, you use what is called a draw plate. It is a steel plate, and it may have insets in it, it may have anything in it, but basically what it has is a whole bunch of holes that are numbered. And depending on the plate, some of them will have measurements in gauges, and some will have measurements in other things. You just need to know what kind of a setup you have. One side, usually the back side, but sometimes the front side, because this one is the front side, this time it's the back side, will have a taper to it. That means it goes from larger to smaller to help to guide the metal into it. In order to use it, you have to taper the end of your wire. So I have several pieces of wire that I cut this morning, and I've already tapered them because I didn't think that was something you needed to watch me do. Initially, when I started doing this, I was using a file, and I would simply put the wood down on the wire down on a piece of wood, and I would file it to create a taper. Now I simply use the wet wheel, which I've shown you guys before, and it makes it easier, it's faster, it's less busted knuckles and that sort of stuff. Now, if you don't have any fancy equipment, the way this is used is you sit on the floor, you take the wire and you place it into the tapered hole, and you grab the end that sticks out with a pair of pliers. Now, these are a special kind of pliers. These are what they call German pulling pliers. And they are beasts. You can see how big and chunky they are. They have lots of scoring on the inside, which means it's going to terribly MR up the metal, but it's also going to not lose grip on it. They also have a hook. And what that does for you is that when you're squeezing this, when you squeeze a regular pair of pliers, there's a tendency when you're pulling really hard for your hand to slide off the end. That won't happen with this because you've got this hook that hooks onto your hand, and it allows you to pull much harder than if you were using a regular pair of pliers. These are what I call a lifetime investment. I don't know how much I spent for these. The initial ones I have, I think, were only like $12 or $15. They're probably way more than that now because I've had my pliers for like 20 years. But I don't know how I would break these. Probably run them over with a large, like, front end loader or something. So I would take the draw plate, I would put the wire through it, I would grab it with these, and I would put the draw plate on the bottom of my feet so that I could pull against the bottom of my feet and draw the wire through. Now, I used to do that a lot, and it will wear your back out and your arms, but mostly your back. And I came up with a way to do the same thing using ratchet straps. Henry and I had talked about whether we had some sort of a winch or not that we could use. And we did have one that I had found, but it was jammed, and I don't know who jammed it, but it wasn't me, and it wasn't Henry. It was probably somebody that was doing some work for us. And we just decided at that moment, at least, not to fiddle with it. So about, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago now, Henry bought me a new winch for Christmas. And that's the setup that I currently have. We have a piece of plywood here that's got a lip on the bottom of it that hooks against this woodworking bench. It has a vise. This is a metalworker's vise, I think. Yeah, I think it's a machinist's vise. And I clamp the draw plate in it that I'm going to use. I have this organized so I know exactly what numbers I'm going to use. I also have a reminder chart on the wall because I draw down 2 sizes of wire. And sometimes if you haven't done it for a minute or two, it's nice to, like sometimes months, it's nice to have a reminder. So this is 14 gauge wire, and I have tapered the end, and I'm going to stick it in here, and I'm going to start in the biggest hole here. I'm going to use the pulling pliers just to get another little bit through here, because I want a really good end here. Now, here comes the magic part that saves backs, fingers, and everything else. Electric winch. So I have another pair of pulling pliers attached to this electric winch, and I'll show them to you in a minute. They're a little different. It's going to make a lot of noise. Okay, this part here is the standard winch. It's got a cable on it, came from Harbor Freight, not by any sense of the imagination the heavy-dutyest one they have, but more than heavy-duty enough for this. I simply put a welded ring on it that is designed for heavy use. You don't want to use anything flimsy that might come apart. This is another pair of drawing pliers or drawing tongs. You'll notice that these guys have hooks on both handles, and what that allows me to do is put them into this ring, and the process of pulling this, because it's a ring, pulls these together, holds that closed, and keeps the wire that I've got sticking out of the straw plate from falling out. So all I have to do is clamp it on the end of the wire, push the button, and it pulls it. The natural process of pulling it forces the 2 handles together and holds this closed. If I'm concerned about it for some reason, I'm doing something a little unusual or something like that, what I can do is I can use a clamp of some sort right there. I have used, let's see, who's living over here right now? I have used the bigger clamps like this before. Most of the time, if I really feel I need something, I will simply use a clip, just a spring clip like this. And all I would do is I would put it on here. And that means that when this eventually pulls all the way through, this will not open, and the wire will not go spring off there. So I'll show you what happens here. Now, what I have done is I have stopped this just before it comes through the draw plate. I've got about 1 inch left on the outside of the draw plate. If you strum this, you can hear it. It's like a guitar string. It's very tight and very straight and all that kind of stuff. When I pull it through here, because I've got that clamp on there, the wire is not going to fly away. A lot of times I don't worry about it. Depends on what I'm making. If I'm making something like fibula, where I'm going to be completely reshaping the wire, sometimes I will not worry about the clamp, because I'm going to be reshaping it anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's a little curly-cued. If I am doing something like needles or pins, then sometimes I will put a clamp on just because it keeps the wire a little straighter. Okay, see, when it pulled through, all it did was go flop. This is still pretty darn straight. And I'll show you what happens if you don't do that. I have some wire that fell down here. Let me move him over here. These are other wires I'm going to draw down. I have a holder over here. I just didn't bother to put it in there. Okay. If I'm using a clamp, then what I have to do is unclamp it. And I come back down to this end. I put it in the next hole, which is smaller than the previous hole. Now, one of the things you have to consider when you're doing this kind of stuff is that every time you draw the wire down, it is going to be getting longer. Right now you can see that when the wire was pulled all the way through the draw plate, it came to here. When I draw it down again, it's going to be farther down there. And by the time I draw it down the third time, it's going to be almost all the way to the winch over here. So I am limited in the length of wire that I can draw without running out of space here. It is possible to create scenarios where you can do longer pieces, but this is as long as I need. If I make the wire too long, then it becomes sort of awkward to actually use when I go to manufacture with it. So let me show again. This is a slightly different angle. I've got the wire through here. I've used a pair of the pliers to grab it and make sure there's a good chunk sticking through. I'm going to turn this on again. Noisy, noisy. Okay, now I've clamped it on there. And I've pulled it. Now, I'm going to show what happens when I don't have a clamp on. You'll see it spraying. I release as fast as I can because I don't need to keep running it. But you saw how it sprung out of the pliers and got a little bit more curly. Now I'm going to do it one more time because that's the size I need for the project I have going. And this time I'll clamp it so that it stays as straight as possible because I need it for something straight, which in this case is manufacturing needles. I don't know if you can tell, but this is a little farther up here than it was. I think it was more like down here before. So every time I draw this, it will get closer and closer to the winch, which is over there. So one more time. Okay, I'm going to make this wire stick out just a smidge more. And that is experience, is the best way to put it. So. Okay, now I'm going to put the clamp on it. I have some options. I can draw it and then release it and release the pressure on it and then reset the draw tongs so that they're grabbing another piece of metal. If I was very concerned about not being able to straighten the wire, I'm not that concerned about it. But as you can see, that winch over there is doing all the work for me. I don't have to, bust myself trying to get this done. So we'll draw it down one more time. And I think you can see that this is definitely much closer to the winch now than it was before. Let me move some of this stuff here. There we go. It's definitely much closer to the winch. The first time I stopped it, it was like here. The second time's here. So it's getting, and I have half an inch to pull through there. But you can imagine that at some point, your brain may be thinking, oh, well, there's room here. Yeah, but this stuff here has to not get pulled into the winch. So I've got 6-8 inches left of that cable before I would be in trouble. And when I say in trouble, it just starts to wind it into the winch. So I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to make sure that this piece of wire that I'm drawing down is always short enough. In the case of the setup that I have here, 4 feet long is the longest wire I can draw down. I can draw down shorter pieces, so if I get to the end of a roll of wire and it's shorter than that and I still want to use that wire, I can do that without any problem. It just means I wind up with a shorter piece. It's efficient to use all the wires, so I would always draw down everything. You don't lose much of the wire. You lose about 1 inch to 2 inches at one end, at the pointy end, and usually nothing at the other end, although sometimes I will choose to cut off that last 1/16 of an inch because I don't like the finish on the wire. And that has to do with whatever cutter I've used. When I was cutting this morning, for instance, I couldn't find my regular cutters because I haven't reestablished everything down here after the event that we attended. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing. But you can see again, nice bass guitar string there. And there we go. And it's pretty straight. It's 3 sizes smaller. And most important, it's springy. And that's why we do it. I have people ask me on a fairly regular basis why we draw down our wire. Historically, it was done because you were making a piece of jewelry and you needed a different size than what you had in stock. And either you didn't have the money or you didn't want to drive an hour to go get it or whatever. From where I am, if I wanted to go buy it in person, I would have to drive to either Flagstaff or Prescott Valley. I don't think there's any place in Prescott that has anything. So it would be an hour to an hour and a half, depending on traffic. And if there's if the highway's closed, then forget it. You're not getting there. And they might or might not have it. Now, statistically, for regular sterling silver, they would probably have it. But I have gone places before where they were out of something, which is never fun. I can order it in, and I can have it in 2 days. But if I'm trying to finish a project right now, historically, the Native Americans would use a draw plate because, they have stock on hand. They're living out somewhere on the reservation, or like we live out somewhere on a ranch. It's a long haul. You have limited resources. You can't always afford to go buy new. Why should you buy new if you have existing stuff that'll work? So say I wanted to create a nice little twisted wire and I had a bigger wire. I could draw it down at some point. If I'm drawing it down a bunch, like in this case, I want it to be springy. But if I was making jewelry with it, I probably wouldn't want it to be springy, so I would anneal it. And annealing simply means heating it to a temperature that will make it soften. And that temperature depends on what the metal is. So when I do heads for pins, I use 1350. I probably don't need to take it to 1350, but I've got a system that works fine for 1350. And I just let it sit there for like 5 minutes and it's done. It cools down, it's soft. That's what I need for that circumstance. In this circumstance, I want it to be springy. I want it to be naturally stiff. And the process of drawing down metal changes the crystal structure of the metal and makes it hard. That is why if you were to take a piece of wire and you flex it too many times, it breaks. I have seen here, and I've seen it on TV too, which is kind of funny, but I have seen here where you get a street sign that picks up a vibration from the wind and it'll start to twist or it'll vibrate in a specific way. And after it does that for a while, a couple of hours sometimes, it'll break off. And I mean, this is a sturdy piece of metal. We're not talking about something junky here. But it'll break off because you have hardened the metal to the point where it becomes brittle and then it breaks. And that's why if you're making jewelry with metal that has been drawn down, whether you've drawn it down this way for wire or whether you've run it through a rolling mill for flat stock, you have the issue of, am I going to break it if I bend it too much or form it in some way? So that's a whole nother video. But that gives you a sort of a general overview of why we would do this. We get compliments all the time on the quality of our fibula, which is basically what we call an unsafe safety pin. It just doesn't have the safe part that we would put on modernly. And we use it for Roman and Greek. The colonials and Civil War people also use them to pin up the bottoms of their skirts when it's muddy. Keeps you nice and clean, and you know, they don't rust because they're made out of brass. So handy dandy. Regular safety pins are not sturdy enough. They will rust, and that's a bad thing because it ruins your clothes. So I hope you found this interesting. It's one of those things that people ask me about, and usually I'm in a position where I can't show it. I had to do this morning anyway, so it seemed like a natural process. I have lots of other repairs, excuse me. I have lots of other repairs and upkeep that I need to do before I get really started into my winter production here for Christmas. So I already have some of it, the production done, but I need to do a lot more. And I'll be changing up some of my expendable equipment. In other words, I'll be changing belts on the sanders, and I already changed a crucible on the furnace the last time I did casting, but I can talk about that because these are all things that are used up by the process of actually using them. And you just need to be aware of that so that if you're in the middle of doing something, you suddenly don't have something break or run out at the worst time. And it's one of those things that most of us learn the hard way, unless you're lucky enough that somebody gave you a clue. So I'm providing clues free of charge. So until next time, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And make sure you come back because obviously we've got lots going on. And don't forget, keep brainstorming because I've got a list that I brainstormed this morning that's that long. I've already done a whole stack of stuff. I've already maintained my hearing aids. I've already... oh, yeah, that's another story. I'll tell that story later. I've done all kinds of silly things like folding laundry and washing more laundry and all that kind of stuff. You know, the usual stuff that you do in between working for a living. So, until next time, bye.